Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the live audience, and welcome to those individuals that have joined us online. My name is Roseanne Bailey. I'm with Toronto Police Service, Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights Unit. Thank you very much for coming out to our first town hall around the race and identity-based data collection. I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. So I standing on the ground. Okay, so I acknowledge the land that I'm standing on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and the Mississauga of the Credit. We also acknowledge all treaty people, including those who have come here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations of the past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Today, we pay tribute to the ancestors of those of African origins and descent. I want to say thank you to our community partners, Delta Family Services. You can put your hand up to say hello. Awesome. And also to Rexdale Community Health Center. Awesome. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to hand it over to our MC, our facilitator, who will do majority of the discussion tonight, and then individuals will introduce themselves on the panel. Thank you very much.
I would like to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming out and being a part of the process where we can start developing ways that we can work together and be collaborative, find solutions together. So this evening is really an evening to celebrate collaboration. There is a lot of work to do, very intense work to do. But we want this space to be a loving workspace. So we have two wonderful people in the back that if you feel that you need to work through some of the issues, talk with someone around these issues, you can do so. We have Shana and Jennifer. Thank you so much for your service, and thank you for being here today. And again, you can walk to them and talk to them, and they can walk you through how you're feeling about the process and how you're getting through. One of the things that I have to say, I would like to thank everyone who's at service for having this and opening and listening to the community. My name is Claudia McCoy, and I've done a lot of work in various areas. In the region of Peel, I actually worked with the City of Mississauga to come up with equity programs. I also work with the Peel Regional Police to find ways to be collaborative with the community. We need you. And so you being here is a wonderful start. So thank you so much. We also have here people from the force that are here to listen and walk you through how the TPS is going to work with you further to come up with good solutions. So I'd like to hand you the floor. Thank you so much. Colin Stairs, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Colin Stairs. I'm a Deputy Chief Information and Technology at the Toronto Police Service. I've been the executive champion of the race-based data project. I've been pleased to do it, and I've been trying to make this as inclusive and collaborative as it can be. That's been a real challenge, and I don't think we've done it well enough. So I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk with real people, not over a video link, and talk to you about the analysis, what we've been finding, and what we think we ought to do about it, and try and validate that with all of you folks. This is a small enough room. I'd like this to be a collaborative conversation, and so if you have something, it's not all presentation, you want to say something, I'm listening. And if we collectively want to take this in a different direction, then we'll take it in a different direction. This is about you, this is about your voices, and we're here to listen. We've got a lot of information, a lot of things we've done, but again, it's about listening. Michelle, you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Good evening, everybody. I just want to start off by saying thank you for coming. I see some familiar faces here. My name is Michelle Cipro. I'm the inspector at 23 Division. I've come here with some of my neighborhood community officers who are happy to participate. We're here to listen, and we're here to answer any questions you might have. So please feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you need. Thank you, sir.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mai Fan, and I am the equity data scientist that has been supporting the service to implement the race and identity-based data collection strategy. We put out a report in June with a lot of complex findings. So I'm here really to answer any questions that you have about what we found and what we can learn from it, but also where are we going next and what more do we need to do to better understand the impacts of policing on communities and how we can improve policing together.
Thank you. Also, as a facilitator tonight, I want to make sure that you know that there are 2 microphones that you can come up to. They're going to walk you through a presentation. After that, if you have any questions, please voice them. We need to hear your questions and to guide this process, so do not feel shy at all. And I will encourage you through the process. Colin, would you like to start the presentation?
Sure. Well, I'm just going to get us on the right slide here. Okay. Do you want to handle this one? Okay. Why don't we do the build right through, please? Why are we gathering here? The race-based data analysis is a lot of deep analysis. We gathered data for a full year. We did 2 years of analysis on that data. Dr. Fan did a ton of work trying to look for the answers to the questions that the community was putting to us. We've taken what I'd call a question and answer type approach. So instead of just saying, well, here's the data and here's what it does, here's what it says, we've asked our community members through the 12-member community advisory panel to ask questions on behalf of the community. And then we pulled all those questions together and we looked at which ones we could answer with the data that we had. We got about a quarter of them answered. There's a lot of that analysis that's been put up on our website, but it's really hard to digest. So we're here to tell you sort of the highlights, but also to answer your questions, some of which are answered and some of which aren't. So one of the things we ran into really early on when we're talking to the community advisory panel was that most people think of policing kind of like this, which is that it's all relatively simple. Somebody does something, the police show up, they get arrested, they get booked, and maybe they go to jail, maybe they get released, and there's a trial or something like that. It's actually a real simplification of how it works. This is more or less what it looks like in real life. And what I'd like you to note is, we call this a subway diagram, so it's like your TTC route map. But we're starting everything from that side, and we're moving to this side. You just look at all the different ways that a police interaction could start, and everything that could lead to someone having an interaction with police. Okay, and as we're doing this, we also have sort of side routes if it's a mental health issue. We have side routes if the person's released at scene. We have different events that are happening in court. Okay, so what we focused on here in this analysis was basically 2 things. One was when we're using force, and also when we're doing strip searches. So strip searches are sort of the second highest order of search. They're only really done when someone is being booked at a station. So you've been arrested, you've been brought to a station, and now you're being processed to be held or then released. And use of force happens in a couple places, but most of the time use of force happens right about when the police show up and they've got to get control of a situation. So seeing this diagram helps you understand just how complex this whole space is, and helps sort of locate some of the issues. I think we put this diagram up somewhere around the room. I don't see it, but it's super helpful to have a look at this and understand how complex policing is. So what we've come up with out of the race-based data is a series of changes that we think make sense, but they're probably not adequate or sufficient. And we also don't think that it's fair for us to write the formula or the answer to what we do about this without a lot of input and engagement from you folks. So what do you want to add to our action plan? What do you think doesn't make sense or isn't sufficient or doesn't go far enough? Those are all things that we want to have a conversation about. I don't have this. I keep on having to turn around to see the slide. Yeah, thank you. No, we're not. Do you want? It's at the end. Thank you. There you go. There we go. I'll start at processes. One of the things that we think we need to stiffen up is how the reviews of body-worn cameras that we've now implemented are being done anytime there's a use of force situation. So if you're a new cop and you're on probation, it'll be mandatory not only to have a review of the body-worn camera should a use of force happen, but that there's a debrief. So you're going to sit down with your boss and you're going to talk through what happened, how you might have avoided that use of force, whether it was not just justified, but whether it was reasonable to do that, and that'll be reviewed. And if there's any issues, it goes up the chain. We're also going to make it mandatory for a review of all use of force body-worn camera. Right? So that's to make sure that when we do use force, it's scrutinized. We're going to change the officer performance report. So everybody has a scorecard. The students in the front row, you probably got your report card. Cops get report cards too. And those report cards have a whole bunch of metrics, but we need to add more metrics to it. And we think that use of force metrics need to be developed. That's going to be a bigger process, and we want community involvement in that process to define what the new officer performance report ought to look like. That's the OPR. And we think that'll be very impactful if we can move that forward. We also want to create a post-interaction survey. So if you've ever gone to Starbucks and gotten an email afterwards saying, how did we do? Rate us from 0 to 10. We want to do a similar thing for policing interactions so that we gather more low-level feedback so nobody's intimidated by a complaints process but can still give us a signal that we can pick up on and say, that didn't smell right, we need to look at this, we need to change our processes, and to create lighter feedback so we don't have to use the heavier feedback. We're obviously going to do a lot of consultation, so this is part of it, but we want to listen more, and we want to deepen the way that we do this so that we're constantly updating the public on how the race-based data analysis and the equity program is going, and do that on a monthly, quarterly basis. We're going to be introducing a committee to look at use of force reviews and upgrading the committee that reviews strip search. So those are both getting more senior officer scrutiny on the use of force and strip search. All the analytics that we're doing are going to be published online, and it's soon to be open data, which means you can run your own analysis on what we found and how you would analyze it. And very importantly, we're looking at officer training and how do we make officer training more compassionate, more aware of the issues that underlie some of the inequities that we have in policing. So there's 38 recommendations. They're all around the room, but we want your input on what you think of them, which ones need to be modified, changed, augmented, dropped, what have you. So should we break and take microphones, take questions with the microphone? I don't know that anybody's lined up yet, but.
So again, there are 2 microphones. Are there any questions? What's your name? Would you like to come up to the mic? Come here. Can you just say your name in the mic? Wait, this is a little bit tall for you. do I bring this down for her? There you go.
Hi, my name's Ariana. I always want to be a police officer, and being a police officer is really interesting to me because I always want to catch a bad guy, and that's it.
That's it. Do you have a question for the people that were speaking? Did you hear anything that they said? So how can this little one become a good police officer growing up? Anyone?
Well, she's already doing the right thing, right? You were speaking to some of my officers, I think, outside, right? Getting
Yeah.
some ideas? Yeah, 100%. We're going to stay in touch, don't worry. Thank you.
So much. Thank you. So you were talking about, when you look at the, I am not good with microphones. Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you so much. The mic is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Panel,
Evening.
audience, media. My name is Stacy Rodriguez. I am the Business Development Officer of the BCCCC. It is the Black Community Consultative Group of the Toronto Police Service. Essentially, we are your community group, and we are your community group leaders. My question for the panel this evening is, when we're talking about the governance and we're talking about the data being published, I just want to have the community involved as well, and we are part of the TPS as well. I just want to, I don't know if it's more of a question or statement, but the concern that has been expressed to us is that the involvement of the community leaders and the community groups at the governance table, and when the findings are being published, the community groups that are involved in the findings should also be published. And wherein the conversations are not expanded out to those community groups, we would ask for, on behalf of some of the community members that have engaged us, that you also give them that information and state whether the community group has not been involved in that conversation. Because these are conversations that we're engaging with at the community level. And we want to also be responsible as the Black Community Consultative Group of the TPS to our community, and to be on the grounds of ethics and rules of fair play to our TPS counterparts.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. I'll just say that I think that we could have done better on the consultative process through this round. We brought in some community members, but we didn't engage continuously with the community as we went through this analysis. And that's something that I intend to correct going forward. We're trying to, I mean, this is heavy, this is complex stuff. It's a bit nerdy, a lot of stats and math. I happen to like that, but not everybody does. So bringing the analysis forward, and making it easy to digest, and so that people can understand, comment on it, and direct. I think the way to do that is through that sort of question and answer basis, so that the questions that you put to us, we maintain as questions until we can answer them. And by doing that, we're giving ownership to you and control to you to direct the race-based data analysis. So as I said, we had like 80 questions from our community groups. I've probably since then thought up another 15 or so through various conversations with various folks. And we want to continue to try and resolve those questions. We're also, we've been asked by the Toronto Police Services Board and a key member on that board to take a look at what we did well and what we did poorly and what we're going to change about race-based data. And we're going to come to the December board with that. But you can certainly influence that today through your comments. I think the BCCC in particular, we're probably going to have more contact group type conversations to share what we're doing as we're doing it.
Actually, I have one quick question for you, just to hopefully get people started. Can you speak a little bit about to the quality of the data? If a lot of what you're doing is resting on data, so let's talk a little bit, May, about how you're overlooking at the definition of quality, and it's the community involved in that process of defining quality acquisition of data.
Yeah, thank you so much. One of the things that's difficult with doing this work in a very collaborative and open way is just how technical it is, and so, we had a community advisory panel, which involved 12 members of diverse communities. I think one of them is here. Hi, Paula. Would you like to have a seat? We had, it took us a year to really engage with the community members of the panel to get everyone on an understanding, a baseline understanding of the TPS data systems, how the data is collected, some of the gaps in the data system and some of the issues that we had to address. That includes identifying which data is useful and of sufficient quality that we could use it to understand racial disproportionalities or disparities in some of the outcomes that we were interested in, such as use of force and strip searches. And it also meant, where are we missing information, right? We don't have either the data quality is too poor and it's not being collected in a consistent way in all of our interactions, or we're just not collecting it at all in order to understand, the complexities of each interaction and to identify those patterns so that we can get closer to a concrete solution. So it was a lot of assessing the systems. And one of the first things we did was, where are we collecting race information and what does it mean, right? There's a lot of conversations in communities and general agreement that race is a socially constructed concept. So what does it mean when we're collecting this information? It doesn't really mean anything to the individual that it often gets attached to, right? And it can often be confused with other aspects of our identities that are much more real to us, right? Like, I'll give an example for myself. My family's Vietnamese. But one of the things I've quickly learned growing up in Ontario is that Vietnamese means, people don't quite understand what that means or what it involves. Instead, what they see is an Asian woman, right? And then all the stereotypes about Asian women kick in, all the expectations, right? That I be shy and quiet, but I'm not none of those things. And so, it gets complex, right? And so what we really want to understand when we're collecting and asking about race is, what is our experience with racialization, how other people see us, and does that impact how we are treated? And does that impact our outcomes? And so that means we had to, engage with our officers, train our officers to understand why perceived race matters, to understand racial bias in our systems and in our culture and in our ideologies. And so analyzing race as officer perception helps us to get as whether there's systemic implicit bias at play in some of these outcomes, and in where does it happen, in what situations does it happen, right? And so that means we had to really understand our data systems and its capacities. That's to say that, we did find some promising result in that, when we tightened training around these things, we did get good quality data to understand and answer some questions. But we have a lot of work to do to improve other areas of our data systems, because there's a lot of unanswered questions. That doesn't allow us to get really deep into why we are seeing differences in outcomes. So Colin spoke a little bit about, some of the actions. He gave some examples of action items, changes that we're making. And we're making those changes because we're seeing that there were differences in outcomes when officers were interacting in certain situations. But we don't understand why, right? But that doesn't stop us from, making changes like improving accountability and supervision whenever use of force happens. But we still need to dig deeper, and that's where we want to collaborate with you going forward in a much more deep way to puzzle that together, but also to start to collect and analyze other areas of policing interactions. That includes arrests, youth diversions, mental health apprehensions, child apprehensions, releases and charges, right? We haven't gotten there yet. And those are some of the areas where we want to look at to see some of the upstream effects of policing that might impact the downstream outcomes like use of force and strip searches.
So can I just add that? So it's not a one and done, right? That's super important. We've done use of force and strip search. We got a lot more things that we got to look at to try and find a bias in them, and you can probably list off a few of them yourself. Addressing those next steps, super important. That this is just a continuous process of trying to find places where we can make changes to eliminate bias. And if we're not looking at racism, we're going to be looking at gender issues. If we're not looking at that, we're going to be looking at something else. Driving towards equity is a continuous improvement process. It's not a one-time affair. And trying to make that more transparent and inclusive is what we're about. Okay. The other thing I'll say about the data, just to really simplify this, we've got a kind of dimly lit room. And I don't know if you ever come home, the kids are asleep, and you got to move through the house with the lights out. You can't move that fast. So just a little bit of light is better than no light. And we are trying to shed as much light on this as we can. Our policing systems, like the IT systems, the information systems, we're not designed to do the things that we're doing with them. We're kind of forcing it in. And so that's where we get to the point where we can't really trust some of the data to answer the questions that we want answered. And so then it's like, okay, we got to change this measurement system so that we can actually measure what it is that we want and get more light in the room so we can move faster towards the reforms that everybody wants.
Colin, can you actually give a little bit more detail around that? When you say you can't trust the data, so you want to use another vehicle to actually get a better mechanism? Just give an example. So
let me look at one of the examples, right? So we found that there was a bias in use of force interactions. Once police were in front of you, different races had different rates of use of force. That's the thing. So then we're like, okay, so why? Well, it turns out that different call types have different biases as well, and it's rather stark difference. So some of the violent crime you'd expect to be high. No, it's actually a low difference by race. But mental health calls much higher difference by race. So, okay, what's driving that? What's happening there? That's a real question. So what information do we have and how can we study that problem? Well, probably the body-worn cameras. So if we can start to do a study of all the interactions and start to see like what's happening there. And to do that collaboratively with members of the community so that we got all the cards on the table, and then try and assess what's wrong with our mental health practices and policies. Why is that happening? And how do we address it and change it? So that's an example of what I'm talking about. You, sir. Yes, sir.
So, yeah, please come to the mic. Thank you so much for being here. The mic is yours.
My name is Abraham Abi. I live in the community. I want to ask a question about how you collect data on mental health on the adult level and youth level. And how do you treat that community when enforcement is being applied? Thank you.
It's a big question. Do you want to address the question on how we collect the data, or so?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I can address it from my perspective, working with the data on the back end. And maybe Michelle can help, explain from the operational frontline member perspective. But from the back end, what I'm seeing and my understanding of the mental health related information is really the officer's assessment and also what is described to the 911 call dispatcher. So, there are two sources of information there, right? Depending on the nature of the 911 call, the person may describe it as a person going through a mental health episode or struggling with, if the caller identifies the behavior as a mental health related behavior, then the dispatcher would describe that as a person in crisis call, they would describe it in various ways so that when they send the officer to the scene, the officer is aware. It may be also the point in time where the mobile crisis intervention team, gets called in and involved. And Michelle, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Right? And so that's the call for service type, right? That's one way we can identify if there was a mental health component. The other way is that the officer comes to the scene and interacts with the person and recognizes a mental health issue, right? Either the person is attempting to harm themselves or is behaving in a way that suggests they are going through a mental health situation, then the officer will define that as in various ways in our system and capture that information, because the call could have come in as a suspicious behavior, right? The person calls 911, says this person is behaving really strange. I don't know what's going on. I'm worried about them. They might hurt themselves, or they look like they might hurt someone else. We don't know what's happening. The officer comes to the scene, determines that this person has a mental health issue. And then it gets defined that way. So that's another way that we can identify, but it's not perfect, right? Sometimes certain behaviors, and we do have training for officers to recognize mental health issues if it's at play. But it's not perfect, right? It's up to the individual officer to then identify it properly, and that's where we need to better understand how are we identifying these situations and where are the gaps? What are we missing? And also from the call dispatcher perspective. Like, are they asking the right questions so that they are really getting into, the real issues at play before and relaying that information to the officer so that they're prepared to, to de-escalate the situation properly. I don't know if you add something.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of how it happens. Another thing we're doing right now is diversion programs, so we don't necessarily have to attend all calls, which may have a mental health component to them. So again, that happens, like you were saying, at the front end, at the dispatcher level. So certain calls can be sort of diverted over to a crisis worker on the phone, or if it's appropriate and safe, one of our city partners can attend with or without us present. We wouldn't necessarily be sort of leading the response on that call. We would be there as a support, and if things sort of changed a little bit and we were required, we would step up a little bit more. So there's different ways things are, I guess, coded, if you want to call it that, and I guess that's where you would be getting the stats from, how it's put into the call text, either by the dispatcher or by the call taker would put information in the text from whoever phoned it in, and then as well as the officers who are responding.
So youth versus adult?
It's virtually the same.
So
In terms of youth versus adult, there's not a lot of difference in terms of how we would gather that information and track it after the fact.
Abraham, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. I just want to say one thing.
And then the young girl.
I've mentioned my name already. I know in the past you used a gun to maybe arrest situation. Are you backing away from the gun and using other means when mental health is concerned? Because in the past you have failed terribly by shooting people. I want to know what you've done differently going forward.
Okay, that's a pretty general statement. There's a lot of things, like I was sort of alluding to, that we're doing now. A lot of training for officers in terms of de-escalation versus use of force. Our entire training syllabus has changed a lot over the years in response to certain situations that officers have come across. The big thing we're doing right now is a project with our city partners, like I was mentioning earlier, in terms of diverting calls. If officers aren't necessary, we aren't going to go. There's going to be crisis workers that can respond. We have our, you had mentioned our MCIT, which are our mobile crisis officers who work in conjunction with nurses. They go out together. So that's also something that has really developed over the years that we're doing. So there's a lot of things in the works. The big thing, obviously, right now that we've recently started doing is that partner program with the city. In terms of if it's not necessary for an officer to go, we're not going to go.
So let me just add that there is also a zero death policy, and that has informed how we're training officers. There's a lot more mental health training, de-escalation training, and also how we're arming officers differently to try and use the least amount of force and use guns as an absolute last resort. So all officers now have CEWs or tasers. We record every time that happens, and there's a review every time a CEW is deployed. So, so there's a lot of attention and effort on reducing the fatal interactions with police for mental health. That has been a huge focus, particularly of Chief Raymer.
My question is, why were they wearing body cameras and not before?
Okay, so why are we wearing body cameras now and not before?
The question was, why is it now stated that they're wearing body cameras nowadays, but not back then, such as last year or two years ago?
Okay. So I've been very involved in the body-worn camera project. Body-worn cameras were sort of a debated thing 2-3 years ago because it was kind of expensive to put these cameras on everybody. And the question was, are they going to be worth it? There were also questions as to whether the officers were going to turn them off when they're about to do something that they shouldn't. And so that was a real concern. And so we put a lot of energy and attention into the policy that we are going to write in making sure that the officers do wear them and turn them on. And what we're finding is that the officers love their body-worn cameras because they provide a really accurate history of what's occurred. And sometimes events don't go as we want them to, but the body-worn camera is a true-ish record of events. It doesn't always capture everything, but it's been very successful in holding officers accountable in some cases, and in giving a true record of event for the SIU or the OIPRD or for our own investigations.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, so this is being live streamed on YouTube as we go through it. So there's a comment on YouTube that somebody had made a comment in terms of it's really nice to see that police are starting to talk about mental health as a topic. I don't have any further context to that, but that's what was given.
Okay, I think we're very focused on mental health as an issue. A great number of our calls are involving mental health. And obviously through the race-based data, we're also seeing that intersectionality with mental health is a big issue. So, that is a strong focus of the TPS right now. I think I saw some hands going up. Oh, yes.
Hi. Question for you is actually two parts. I don't know if I'm allowed to have the two parts, but it's going to be pretty quick. I noticed in the document, it was interesting, it says revise coach officers training course. It's in progress. Can you elaborate a little on that, one? And then two, my question is, how is classism a factor in the research with the officers?
Sorry.
Classism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to hit the first?
Yeah, so you want to address that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it was the coach officer course syllabus, I think you
Yes.
mentioned. So
Correct. Thank you.
I can just speak to a few changes that have been made sort of at the front end. So when an officer first comes on the job, obviously there's a lot to learn. And we've really looked at who are they placed with right out of the gate, right? We want very professional officers who have obviously not been in trouble or done anything that's going to cause us to be concerned. We really look for quality individuals. Again, we've sort of spoken about how our training has been changing over the years, and that's come into play in the coach officer course as well. But quality individuals in there at the front end. We have a lot of work on bias and racism training, a lot of mental health training, and we really have sort of, I guess, increased the amount of time, number one, and the quality of the subject matter in our coach officer course, because we want them to take our new recruits and really start them off on the right path. It's just really up to the program in general for the coach officers, because we realize how important they are to sort of set the tone for an officer's career from the very beginning.
Follow-up question on that. Just thinking right now, I like what you said, but what about the officers that's been around for how many years? Are they getting retrained on it? Because let's be honest, a lot
Yeah.
has changed in, like you said, mental health.
Yep.
You think about coming out of the pandemic, it's been 3 years. So much
Yeah.
has changed, not only as officers, as us being cooped up for 3 years and not knowing the
100%.
interaction, and also the nervousness of coming out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, a lot has happened, not in the best manner. So how does that play a factor? The ones that have been seasoned as well, are they also getting the necessary training needed, not only for the new recruits, which would make sense?
Yeah, no, I have to say our training, we're known for our training in any number of topics, right? Mental health, obviously, as you say, the pandemic has changed the landscape for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Brought a lot of issues to the forefront. We've had to really up our game and respond to that as best we can. So there's training all the time for all of us. I go on training all the time. Every year, officers go. And whatever's happened over the years, incorporated into that training. So we try to stay very current. So there is, I mean, in my opinion, there's a fair bit of training, no matter how long you've been on. Everyone goes through the same thing, so we're all up to speed.
Awesome, okay.
Yeah.
And then I think my other one, not to stay up, I don't want to take anybody else's time, but in the classism, that report, I don't know who wanted to.
Can you elaborate on the crux of the, like,
Yeah.
to understand the issue?
So
of
if
poverty
you're,
or-
yeah, great, and that's fine, sorry, I kind of like threw it out here, because when Roseanne said it was live stream, I'm like, so not good. In the sense of when a police officer, like how, when you're training it, when you're training the recruits and you're kind of role-playing, if you will, how are you, I'm going to change it around a little bit. If I'm a police officer, I'm going to train a scenario of someone of color, of that, so that you can kind of go through the bias and understand what's happening. How are you training on that? Because not necessarily it's going to be the same, and we all know in every scenario it changes. And BIPOC community, it changes too, right? Being someone of color as well, and God knows how many mixtures that I also have. So how is that training? How is that being involved with the officers to really depict the situation? Does that help a little bit? Did I
Yeah,
make it-
that,
okay.
that helps
okay,
a lot.
good.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, and I wish someone at the college was here to really answer in a more fulsome way. But I do know, just speaking to the, having continuously working with the college to develop and update training, especially around understanding systemic racism, understanding, the race-based data collection strategy, and how to talk to officers around the findings and what are the things that we still need to unpack. The topic about what are the effective training techniques, like scenario-based training, role playing, even virtual reality tools, right, to help undo implicit biases and knee-jerk reactions that we all have, right, in different situations, different triggers. And so, exploring some of these tools to kind of unravel our patterns of thinking, that's definitely something that we've been discussing at the college and with the college to really push the envelope around these issues.
So we also have, you can imagine a fake street with a fake TTC bus, and the officers run scenarios as part of their training at the college. So those scenarios are set up with anti-racism themes embedded in the scenarios, and that training is something that our anti-racism advisory panel, which is part of the board, has been very engaged with. And not to say it's perfect, there's work still to be done on that, and there's more oversight, I think, that the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel is going to exercise. But we're definitely thrusting in that direction to try and make the training as equitable as it possibly can be.
Just keeping a note of the time, we have about 10 minutes before we go into the World Cafe. And I want us to take the opportunity to actually think about some of the questions that we want before we enter into the breakout sessions. One of the questions in the meantime that I wanted to just put to your attention, you spoke, Colin, about the value, just to pick up on one of the questions we had earlier around the value of the body-worn cameras. how are you measuring, or how did you measure the value of it? And then as well, how did you take the sounds and the images and convert them into the various data streams that you have at the organization?
So there's a number of different values. Some of them are more financial. Some of them are more process-oriented, and some of them are intangible. So the impact on accountability, I think, is intangible. The officers, the mandatory requirement for all frontline officers is that they engage their body-worn camera before they engage with the public in any kind of investigative action. So as they're getting out of the car, they're turning on their camera. They're not waiting for something to happen to turn on the camera. I believe that we are generating the most video per officer of anyone in North America right now, any service in North America, because of that policy. So that means that we're generating a lot of video, and there's way too much to review, but we need to identify which interactions need to be reviewed. So we are doing that. And also when there's a complaint against an officer, that video is being reviewed, and it's being reviewed depending by which organization is overseeing us, the SIU, the OIPRD, the PRS, which is the internal investigations. So those are all the values from transparency perspective. It also creates an account. So sometimes people make accusations of what an officer has done, and this will be a true account of what has occurred, and it will have been on from the moment that officer left the car. So there's a lot of value there. There's also the system that does body-worn cameras also helps with a bunch of other things in terms of gathering evidence, evidence of interactions, taking statements, and making the officer's job easier. And so that's having a beneficial effect in terms of the efficiency of officers, and that's been awesome, as well as getting that evidence in a streamlined way to the courts. Which is something that we've been able to do. So that's also a sort of a financial or process benefit of body-worn cameras.
So we're a little early. Roseanne, I want you here to coach me through this process.
If people have questions, just
Yeah.
keep asking the questions, and then we'll just see a natural break.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
so-
great, you're
yeah,
here.
So I have a comment from one of my community members, and I actually have a question as well. So the first comment that I have is thank you for talking about that sometimes, that you gave the example of being Vietnamese and they see Asian, and the comment that I got from one of my ladies in my community, she says that, that is across all ethnic groups, right? Because if you see a person of color, you just assume they're one coming from one part of the world or the other. So, I mean, and I think her comment was, that is the unity. That's the unity, right? Because then you're not being singled out from one part of Asia. They see a beautiful Asian woman. You're not being singled out as a Jamaican, Trinidadian, Guyanese, Venezuelan. You're just seen as a beautiful Black woman. So that was her comment. Thank you for that. And the question that I have based on the information here is you talk about develop an Indigenous specific report on the outcomes of use of force and strip searches. So then are you indicating here that there's a different level of use of force and strip searches that Indigenous people are experiencing? And if so, is there anyone sitting at the table representing the Indigenous community? Or is the Indigenous, just as we're BCCC, is the Indigenous collective community sitting at the table? Because one thing that we are really cognizant of is that while we are all community groups, we are all biologically, forgive me, we are all biologically born one gender or the other. So whether you identify, you're born that way or identify as a woman or a man, we are experiencing the same things across the board as women, the same things, issues across as men. And so this is why the community groups come together. And it has been our experience as the BCCC that we're not only representing just one BIPOC or one community. We are now representing across the spectrum, the landscape of women and men and children and youth. And our goal is to close the gaps, but we want to be realistic. So when on the report it says in progress, do we have predetermined timelines or even tentative timelines so that the communities and the public at large would have an idea of the goals? Because I know we're taking hops to get to the big goals. It would be really helpful to have those needles, I guess, to see where the bars are moving. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacy, for that question, because that's something I'm really passionate about, in that we have not engaged sufficiently with Indigenous communities. It's been very difficult, the pandemic and the ongoing, traumas that Indigenous communities continue to face has really made, the race-based data collection efforts of the TPS low on their priorities. And in the sense that, we have really, wanted to be able to do this work with the Indigenous communities so that their voices could be reflected, and and the colonization context in which policing occurs is respectfully included in how we interpret the findings. And so the reason why we have identified a need for Indigenous-focused report in order to put these findings in that proper context is not to say that the outcomes of Indigenous peoples are necessarily greater or lesser or anything like that in relation to other groups, but that the context in which Indigenous peoples experience institutions like policing is very unique to the rest of us. We all have unique histories and experiences with the systems here, but Indigenous peoples, we are on their land, right? So we needed to properly put that and ground it there. And what we did find in the data, though, and it surprised me, even though it didn't surprise me at the same time, was that the patterns for Indigenous people were unique to other groups. So what do I mean by that? So let's focus on use of force. We took up an approach where, we looked at the over or underrepresentation of different groups in having a police interaction in the first place. That was an enforcement-related, outcome, like being arrested or, receiving a serious provincial offense ticket or summons or diversions or apprehensions, etc. We defined that as an enforcement action outcome. And then we looked at, once there is an enforcement action interaction with police, what were the over or underrepresentation in experiencing a use of force? Right? And what we found was that for Indigenous peoples, they were more likely to have an interaction with police in an enforcement capacity, but once there was an interaction with police, they were less likely to have a use of force. But collectively, it meant that they were more likely to have a use of force by virtue of being in touch with police over their proportion in the population. And that was a unique pattern to Indigenous peoples. Black communities and Middle Eastern communities, we found that there was overrepresentation in having a police contact in an enforcement action. And once there's interaction, there was also an overrepresentation in use of force. And so, we need to address both upstream and downstream for Black and Middle Eastern communities. But for Indigenous communities, this unique pattern underlies the need to really engage with organizations working with Indigenous peoples in the city to see how we can reduce the presence of police to address their community safety needs, their personal vulnerabilities, right? So that they get the help they want, not involving police, because That's really what's driving overrepresentation. It's that initial contact in the first place. And so that requires us to really work specifically with Indigenous peoples in Toronto who have experienced policing and also who work with, vulnerable Indigenous people. So that's and we've heard when we did engage with the ACC, you mentioned the Aboriginal Community Consultative Committee. We also engaged with the Indigenous Justice Division at MAG, who have been our an important stakeholder in guiding us on these issues. And they've, we've heard a desire for an Indigenous specific report. And that meant, moving beyond just looking at use of force and strip searches, but all aspects of the policing interaction pathway, just like we're committing to do for all people, like for all groups, but grounding the Indigenous experience in its proper context, which is the colonial context in Toronto.
Question?
Yes.
What does it take to become a police officer?
Now, it's honestly, the requirements change over the years. There's nothing strict that says you need to have like a police-related, university or college degree or anything like that. It's not like that anymore necessarily. So you just need to apply. Life experience is always good, and have an interest in doing it. And then they sort of look case by case at what someone's background is and if they're suitable for it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We can talk later if you've got specific questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, yes, I have a question. Why is it that you have not yet why have you not consulted with the BCCC about this issue? We have not been consulted yet, so I'd like to know why that is.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We did engage with the BCC early in 2019, and then recently, I think it was in March or April, but we do recognize we need to engage more with the BCCC, and so that's something that we're committing and looking to do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to actually follow up. I wanted to ask the question. Come up, please. The question of how you would like to see that engagement.
Thank you.
Well, you have our...
Fix the mic, sorry.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Raise it up a bit?
That's fine the way it is. Well, you have our contact information because, we are a part of your organization. So you're more than welcome to contact Sarah Ali, Jay Collins, Debbie Kumoy, myself, Stella Raji. There's Angela as well. You're more than welcome to contact any of us about these issues, but if you have not contacted us since 2019, that leaves some serious questions that you need to answer, because this just came out this year and we have not been consulted at all. So that should be very telling to you.
We did engage in June.
I did want to just continue this because I think this is an important question.
Mm-hmm.
First, for some of us who don't know all the acronyms, can you just tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. We're the Black Consultative Committee, and we serve our community. We often engage with police officers and other organizations to serve our community. We're really just here for our community, and we really want to build that bridge between the police and the community, and we're really trying in that aspect. And so it would be a very advantageous of you to consult with us and engage with us and work with us more, so that those type of things could be further,
And in an ideal situation, if you could create in your mind the ideal engagement, I do want to, yeah, the ideal engagement narrative between you and TPS, what would that look like? If you could design it out, what would that look like?
So we're actually in communication with TPS at this point right now. Again, Debbie, sorry, from the team. So there has been, just to go back to also what Stella was saying, we understand there was previous engagement prior to the COVID, and the team has evolved in so many different ways with new members such as ourselves. Regarding your question, though, what does it look like? Open conversation. As a matter of fact, we had the opportunity to be at one of the divisions today, and we were able to help some of the recruits with understanding community relations and understanding the gap. Also understanding the reality of what's happening in the community when approached or when you're going in to understand what the culture really is. So there is, and I think Stacy said it great earlier, there is a step going on. So there is a step moving forward. We just want to keep that step moving forward stronger. And that's what we do. That's where we come in as a collective group.
So Debbie,
Yeah.
I know when I've been doing engagement, basic words, many people have different definitions for what we call, it's like the Tower of Babel, right? Everyone has a different definition.
Yeah.
What does open mean?
Open when it's transparent.
Okay.
And transparent, absolutely. So being transparent, a lot of us, and I'm going to use me as an example, has unfortunately had encounters in the wrong way with police officers. I'm going to be honest. I don't, and I feel I do look kind of cute today. I'm not always in heels, and my hair's not always pulled back, and I am in different gear. And I had an encounter with a police officer that just looked at me at one point in one way with that perception. After speaking with the person, they got to know me when they saw me again like this at another division or an event or at a community relations. They then said, oh, sorry. Keep in mind, I'm not saying all police officers. We have to be real because even our community, there are good and there is bad, and we have to call them out at the same time. So going back to your question, if I could just jump back again, when we are having one step further, that one step is going to push us to the right level where we need to be. We also had an opportunity, BCC's, we have so many acronyms, BCCC. We were able to be on a round table, which I believe you were actually on that table as well, with Michael Ford. And again, that's one step moving forward. And the fact that when you are able to open your voice and open up in terms of comment and experience, and it's being received, it is powerful. Being received and opening up, but now what's the action plan is where we're at. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm actually just going along.
Okay.
What this going through my mind is
I hope
that-
I'm not taking it.
No,
It was-
this
okay.
is very important. What's going in my mind is what the community is asking, and you representing the community, is really to sit down with police and the authorities to actually co-design a path forward. where you can
100%.
work.
Yes, and I can some background and as well to the panel. 19, Debbie is very correct in the sense that our
evolved.
community group was led by different individuals, and it was not as active and boots on the ground as it is now. Currently, our community group is divided north, south, east, and west, and we are actually assigned to police divisions. So you can go into any police division and ask for that Black community consultative contact, and they will reach out to us. We are constantly engaging now with our community police because we want our community division police to know who we are, and we want our communities to know who we are. And this is why we not only stick within the confines or within the demographic of our skin color or a gender. We are communicating now with the corporate world. We are communicating now across the landscape because the conversation of community is not just within your intersection. The conversation of community is now Canada. So if we're talking about closing the gaps and closing where the cracks are, and we know that COVID has exposed these cracks, and they didn't just expose the cracks of government and systems, but they also exposed the cracks of humanity and where we were missing things. And now the BCCC and all of our collective groups, under the guidance of the TPS, we are partners. We are one family. We are siblings in one family. And like any family, we're going to have our disputes. But at the end of the day, we work together to bring the communities together. Our police officers can't be everywhere, and where they can't be, we are. We are all volunteers of the TPS. And we are here because we believe in community. We believe in the work that is being done. We know things aren't perfect, but we believe in going down the road to get to where we need to be as a holistic community, not of your intersection, not of the province. We're talking Canada-wide. Because when an officer goes down, the world doesn't report an officer went down in Peel or Scarborough or Toronto. That's reported worldwide on CNN as an officer went down in Canada. So we are one community and we are one TPS, no matter what our zip codes are. And we have to come together as community collectively. Call out the bad players regardless of what side they're on and just filter it out. And that's what we do. And that's what we're here for.
So I'm just going to add on to that. I think you said it the best, which I understand what you guys are doing. If we do not make it as a family, as a team, you're not going to grow. You're not going to get the proper data that you need to get because it's not going to be communicated properly. And we need that safe space. And I think we're getting there. We're getting there. We are getting there. And we appreciate these town halls that are here where it allows us to have that safe space and also feel comfortable to say that we know if we take it to you. And I can honestly say from being in the last meeting where I had been presented that I saw a movement. And I'm going to say there's a light where we were excited to say, okay, if there's a movement going, something's changing. Something's about to change. Right?
Yeah. Well, definitely. Thank you for your service,
Thank
all
you.
of you. And I really like the fact that you were talking about closing the connectivity. I'm not going to forget you. No, you were talking about closing the connectivity gap because that's exactly what we're here for. Come up here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Again, my name is Abraham Abi. I live in the community and I'm part of the board of directors at Rexdale community. So I'm concerned about my community. And I want to bring the issue to the forefront. About maybe 6 months ago, about 10 people have died in my building of drug overdose. I want the police to find a way to address this issue about drug overdose within our community because it's killing our youth. We have to do something. I know the policing is relevant, but the issue of drug abuse and drug overdose is killing us. Please help us. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that points to the diversion narratives that you were talking about earlier. Michelle, you want to talk a little bit about how we can partner with the community to address these kind of social crises?
Well, we could probably talk all night about that, right? That's right. A loaded comment. One thing I would say, sir, can we maybe talk a little bit later on about specifically where you live, and I can connect you with some officers at the station who are very familiar with that location, and we'll go from there on that. That's a huge problem, right?
Big issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is why you are partnering with communities to actually do that diversion, to actually add, because policing alone can't do it. We need our partnership. I believe there was someone who was just talking about that earlier. We need a full, robust community response to some of these deep issues because you're not always equipped to be able to, hammer for every, every problem doesn't require a hammer.
And we don't know everything either, right? And we have, great committed community members in this division and other divisions I've worked at who are very engaged and who come to us for help and are a great assistance to us in many ways, right? And so that's part of what we need to just further that whole thing, that relationship.
Thank you. I think there's a lovely lady.
Hi, thank you. I'm very much enjoying this town hall. I appreciate the efforts of the TPS to do this and go through this process. I have a small question and a big question, so I'll start small. How long does the TPS keep the footage from each body-worn camera?
I believe it's 2 years plus a day, which is the length of time that a complaint can be lodged. So it's retained for the period of time where a complaint could be lodged against the officer who took part in the incident.
Thanks. And just following off from other people's comments about context and intersectionalities, I guess it brought to mind Mayor Tory's practice of evicting tent city inhabitants and using the police to do so. And as we all know, well, I assume the police are being used to evict people from the tent cities. And we all know that poverty intersects with race, intersects with, you know, gender identity and so forth. And I'm just wondering what the relationship or dynamic has been between the TPS and City Council around the findings of the race-based, of your report. Because the TPS can transform itself inside and be great, but if our politicians, if our mayor keeps sending police out to evict people who are just erecting whatever shelter they can, you know, because they have no other home, then what good does that do for our community? So that's my question, I guess.
I'm not sure on some of these issues.
Thanks so much, Lily, for that question, and it's an important one in terms of, you know, when officers are tasked to you know, and asked to do certain functions by, you know, you gave an example of the tent city encampments. I'll give you an example of how the report has really driven home a sensitivity to the racial impacts, the disparate impacts of policing, and how TPS has become much more alive to not just our intention, right, our goals to support community safety, that's always number one, but also, you know, do we need to be there? Is this our proper function in a certain situation? And so one of the action items that's, you know, we're asking you to comment is we're building an equity impact assessment in all our operational and deployment plans, right? And so when we get requests like, you know, to support with an eviction, you know, we actually do an assessment of what is that impact on the community? Is there a racial or other vulnerability, you know, marginalized communities involved? And so should we take a different direction in terms of how do we support community safety in that situation, but not contribute to the you know, the negative experiences with policing? And, you know, one example I can give concretely that happened fairly recently is with the Swansea building, where, you know, it was crumbling, it was falling down. People were asked to leave that building because it was dangerous, right? The structure was falling apart, and it actually did hurt a woman. And it was also home to a lot of racialized people. And so, you know, to support the eviction, you know, TPS was asked to help with that effort. But rather than just saying yes, uncritically, and just, yes, we've been asked, so we're going to show up, we actually stood back and had a conversation and asked, how do we need to be there? Is there a public safety need? And if there is, then how can we be there to support it in a way that did not, we didn't show up as a force, right? And we're not perceived as a coercive force by the community. That meant, you know, wearing safety vests instead of the big police, right? Vests. It meant standing back, so out of the scene, unless an issue came up, right? And so let the housing manager and the sheriff issue the eviction notices and convince people to, you know, to move out voluntarily without police presence standing there, right, in a coercive presence, right? And so that's actually what happened. Police were not there. They were around the corner instead. And so wearing hard hats and safety vests, so it wasn't an obvious police presence. So that's, you know, that's an example of the sensitivity to the impact of police presence and where we need to be and when we don't need to be there in order to be sensitive to the community.
Let me just pick up on the board and the question about the board's receipt of the race-based data analysis. The board has been hugely supportive of this work, and it speaks to a broader effort to make the organization more transparent, to get better measurement systems in place throughout the service so that not only can we manage ourselves better, but we can be more transparent to the public and more accountable to the public. That has been something that Chief Raymer has been very strong on and has collaborated strongly with the board and the board office to build that direction. And that follows on Chief Saunders' efforts. I mean, my previous title before being called Deputy Chief was Chief Information Officer, and I was the first Chief Information Officer of the Toronto Police Service because there's a realization that we needed some leadership around information, how we use information, and how we make information available to the public and to the board as our governors. So there's been a really strong push on information management generally, but on race-based data and the use of this data to push for equity in particular.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to take a little bit of a deep breath. We've gone through so many wonderful questions. Thank you for participating. We have one more. Okay, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a comment. I know you said that you have a plan, but when you first started your conversation, you didn't mention acknowledgement. And the acknowledgement is that this issue that's affecting my community has been going on for so long. It is not like just yesterday. This is not like 2019. This has been going on for years, several years. And I feel like the panel members today do not touch on that. There is no consideration. I don't feel that from any of the members. You talked about how you made a plan, and yes, you should have involved the community, but that's the first step, not the second, not after you developed your plan. It goes in sequence. It goes together. How could you make a plan without hearing the community? We already know that there's an issue. We know that there is a problem. Every single one of us has stories, and not just stories that are just it starts from every sector. It's coming from the actual operator who's giving out the call to the other officers and how they assess it. Just like in law, they use certain words. What are those words that those operators are giving these officers that tell them, well, this situation is more serious than the next? When they come, disengagement, just talking to the community. They use us in certain terms. I've even had an officer use this to me in referring to my partner, because that's how I expressed the situation. I said my partner. They said my baby father. What are those words that these officers are using that when they meet my community, they don't show consideration? There's nothing that you said today that makes any sense. None of us are feeling it, let's just say, on the ground. You're tabling these things, but it's not felt by any one of us. I just want you to know that. Even though you've assessed what you've assessed and you gathered all your information, it still makes no sense to my community. Because every time we engage an officer and an officer engages us, they look at us and they stereotype us, and they're just doing it. They're doing it. Now, you said that you have a plan and you're training your students in the colleges. Well, I went to Humber College. That's just a course. It's a course.
It's a police college.
Yes,
No, it's not Humber, there's a larger.
okay,
police
but
college.
but even if it is, it's still an institution that they still have to issue out a program. It's a program. It's not real. You know that when you're on the ground, situations turn up all the time. Things change. And every time an officer is engaged with a community member and something goes wrong, the first thing they say in accountability is, I'm human too. You guys are in the position of being in an authoritative manner. So when we see an officer, it's like we have to act a certain way, do a certain thing, say a certain thing. Because all the time we're protecting ourselves when we're engaging an officer. That's the real problem. When you're tabling your plan, I don't feel like, just like what the other community members are saying, that you don't speak to them And then it's like, you said, yeah, we should do more. I mean, it's so nonchalant. I feel like there was no empathy in that. There was no realism in that. The situations that we experience are real. What you guys are doing is tabling a plan that's not real. And that's the issue. Sorry.
You need not apologize. I do want to continue talking. You said some passionate things, and it's very important for us to be able to go from a situation where we feel disconnected to empowered. What is that pathway? A simple thing. I'm not asking you to come up with all the solutions, but if there's one simple thing that would convert this disconnect, right? This trust, right? Earned, right? Distrust into productive empowerment for our community. What does that look like for you?
Well, at first, the officers, sorry. At first, I mean, we all know when, it's just like when you see me, you make an assessment. When we see the officers, we're making an assessment too.
Yeah.
They're in a position where they hold a gun. We know this. Sometimes our community don't feel comfortable in saying everything.
Yeah.
And then when they come, it's like the officers already know that they're at a disadvantage. So you know what they will do? They will come with one of our community members to approach us. Because they feel like that's an avenue that they will use to get us to speak. But it shouldn't be like that. This is what I'm trying to say. The media, the news, everything that's reported, certain words that are said, just stigmatize us.
You know, there's something that you were saying this is ringing in my mind, is how people read us.
Yes.
Oftentimes, we don't cry,
No.
right? So
I'm a mother with 7 children. I cannot cry.
We don't cry. So that sympathy doesn't necessarily see. So when we talk, sometimes people assume, many times, they see anger, not fear.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And how are we assessing the emotional communication and narratives in our communities that are very different on a cultural basis?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really, really appreciate what you shared with us, because that is something that we've tried to embed in the anti-Black racism and policing course, is an understanding of where communities are coming from, and how communities have had to work around and lived with the impacts of systemic racism, and it's as an existential threat, right? Not just personally, but also as a collective. And what that might look like in behaviors that officers might misread, right? You know, like you mentioned, certain behaviors are read as anger or suspicion, when really it is underlying that is fear, nervousness, anxiety in that interaction, right? And so understanding the history and the lived experiences of people is something that we've, I know that in the anti-Black racism module course, and, you know, I take your point, you know, about it's just formal education. What is that? How does that translate to real outcomes and change behaviors in officer? Yeah.
In school, we're trained.
Yeah.
That we're supposed to judge a situation based on how you see it. They know, it's just like I can't have a bias towards anybody I'm going to serve. That's, I think, the real issue. With the police officers, they have already formulated their own bias before we could even say anything. And this is what I'm saying. How do you get this plan? It starts from maybe the operator, maybe certain words that were used could even escalate the situation on the ground just by what she said. What I'm saying. There's a discrimination based on jurisdiction as well. Yeah. The officers who attend certain jurisdictions already have a formulated plan. They know that if I call from my area, they're gonna take an hour and a half to come to me. And I could be kicking and screaming on the phone, it doesn't matter. They will take an hour and a half because they think that my community is made up of only people of my kind, so we're irrelevant. I've had this happen several times, and I have 7 children. And even if I mention the safety of my children, I still get an officer to attend to my home 2 hours later. By that time, I'm dead. There's no help there. Where's the plan? You have to go back to the table, to the drawing board, and reevaluate all the officers who are seasoned. Because I always hear from this officer, oh yes, we're doing it, but sometimes you base that assessment based on how many years an officer has been in the force. You automatically assume that that officer has everything that they need to justifiably, handle an issue in any area. But that answer is no, because we're living in an ever-changing world.
That's
Things
true.
have to be developed.
Yeah, which they are, right?
Exactly. Some officers who are seasoned in the force have this perception that they know it all. This is where the problem lies. Maybe you guys are not assessing that properly. You're not going back and reviewing things. It's just like for the TTC, if there's an issue with service, they're gonna bring a supervisor to attend with each officer. Where is that? We never see that. So we can see the interactions that are going on, what is said by the officers. Sometimes these things are not recorded. I've been to the police station, I've reported certain things, and when I tell them, well, can I have a paper written down with a report number, you know what an officer told me in 23 Division? He has no paper to make a report, and I had all my children sitting there. Now you tell me, what am I gonna do? Kick and scream? Oh, get me somebody else. Now I'm disgruntled. Now I'm just making an argument. This is the assessment, so we don't even report it anymore. Now you won't get the data that you need, because people have a general fear that nothing will happen. You said you have a plan, but you don't have a solution. This has been going on for so many years. 2 years? You should have come up with a solution by now, not a plan. That's not real.
So I just want a chance to speak up and maybe in our defense, if you will. I hear what you're saying, and I'm sorry you've gone through that.
I've gone through plenty more, miss, and
Well, it sounds like it.
everybody here, everybody
Yeah.
has a story.
So obviously, we have a lot to talk about. All I can say is just give us a chance. We are working towards trying to look at some of the things you've mentioned. Just for example, I have officers here, neighborhood community officers. That's a new development over the years, and that's trying to change that, where the only time we see people is at a night when they're at their worst or when it's the worst situation ever. We're trying to establish these relationships and break down some of what you're talking about, right? It's a long process. Have we made mistakes? Yes. Have people in the community had bad experiences? 100%.
See, this is what
Right?
we wanted. We wanted you to see
Yeah.
it before.
Well, it
Based
didn't
on my
really,
comment, it should have been right off the bat, because we already know there's an issue.
yeah, well, that's why we're here. That's why they're doing the work, right?
I've gotten down to you and I've explained things, and now you've said something that I can listen to.
Yeah.
Before, I wasn't hearing you. I'm just being
So maybe
honest.
we need to revisit our formatting then. This is the first one of these, right? So this is why everyone's here. This is why you're speaking up, and this is why maybe moving forward, we tweak the next one. And we come out of the gate with a different message. That we all feel the same way. That's why they're doing the work.
Yeah.
Right? That's why I'm on the job. That's why we have all these guys here in the back. We're here for the community, right? I mean, it doesn't sound like it's appeared that way to you all the time. And that's unfortunate, and I'm sorry.
I've had officers that have been, but how did they get to relate to me? By telling me their own experiences. Do you see what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
because I'm saying, no, I'm listening to them as well. Because I have to understand, you are human, you're a person too. You
Yeah.
deal with many issues. You have your own personal issues. This is what I'm saying. When officers engage our community, are they leaving behind all the negativity at home? And when they're coming and engaging, they're on a clear slate. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
Not bringing past maybe an officer could have experienced, maybe in his younger life. And now he's an officer and somebody of integrity, now he's exuding that on everybody else in certain other, we won't be able to decipher on where and where. Just like you said, you're collecting data. That's just data. There's no, you have to get on the ground. You gotta come out. It doesn't matter how negative it looks. The point is that you're engaging. And even if he might not get it or he might not get it, we are seeing that. But right now, we're not seeing that.
You're feeling a huge disconnect.
There's the gaps.
Yeah.
Those are the gaps.
Yeah. Well, that's for us to work on then moving forward.
Yes, and you will do that
It's the whole
based
point
on
of it.
what these females had said, by engaging
Yeah.
the members of our representatives of our community.
Yeah.
Coming out and speaking, like this forum right here, I feel like the time slot, if it was on a Saturday, you'd probably get more people to come, more people to say things. Right now, it's a working day. Someone like me, I have some of my children, I can't get out. But this was so important to me, you have to understand. This was so important to me because it affects my children. This is how they're gonna be able to be successful in life, in the city. Like I said, we're one community, we're one family, we're supposed to work together. We shouldn't feel, negativity, we shouldn't feel closed or boxed in. We need to engage each other and show consideration. I think consideration is the biggest thing.
Thank you.
Agreed.
I really want to thank you for that, because there's a couple of things you said that really resonated with me. And one is the difference between data and meaning. And the next piece that was really important is that closing that connectivity gap with humanization on both sides and all sides. So those are really important, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. I have one last person who wants to have a question. Please step forward.
No cameras.
Hi, so it's more of a comment than a question. I'm one of the people who make up the CAP, and I just wanted to let you know.
Community Advisory Panel.
Community Advisory Panel, sorry. So we're part of, I'm part of the group that sat down and looked at the data and went through it. We discussed it, and we helped the TPS put together some of the reports that you see today, or that you've seen posted on the internet. So I just wanted to say, I was running late, so I didn't sit at the table, but to speak to your point, there are representation from different parts of our community that's sitting on the panel, and there are times that we really hash it out about certain points. So we're doing our best to bring the voices from all corners of the city to the panel when we meet, okay? I can tell you that that's the lens that I use, and a lot of my other co-members on the group. We're not just yes people, we're letting your voice be heard through us. I teach at a school at Martin Grove and Finch, and I live by the zoo. So I see a cross-section of the city every day. I'm on the 401 from one end of the city to the other. So when my lens, it's very wide and it's very deep. And one of the lenses that I bring as well is about people with disabilities, because I find that voice is not being heard or not being loud enough, okay? So it's all about race, it's about class, it's about abilities. All of those voices are being brought to the panel when we meet.
Paula, right? Is that the name? Paula, how are you amplifying your message? So you're on the panel, you're doing this work. How's that getting back to the as you said, the ground? Do you have the resources to do it, or do you need more resources to amplify that message?
Well, I'm here today. So this is one way that's being done, is just meeting with the community, and just when I talk to people, I may not say that I'm part of this group, but I may ask questions just to get a feedback about how they're feeling about things. And I know one of the things is the disability voice in this city has been muted.
Yeah.
Every time you go somewhere, they're saying, go click online, go to this user email. Not everybody has access to that, and not everybody can because of abilities.
Right.
And I don't think the people who run the city are understanding that.
Yeah, we need a lot of work around those intersectionalities.
Right, so I just wanted to let people know, yes, I'm just one person, but this is what I'm trying to do, and the rest of the people on the panel is doing this. I can guarantee you of that. We have discussions, we bring up issues, and we talk it out, and we go forward.
To all the community leaders like yourself, I will definitely thank you for your service. So we've been going through a lot and a lot of emotion. I just want to reiterate that if anybody's feeling like they need to just talk things out, we have two therapists, Jennifer and Serna at the back. She's like, don't mess up my name, girl. But seriously, they're there to walk us through, and we need a lot of healing, as evident around the table. There's something that we have called the World Cafe, and this is where we're going to take engagement another step forward, where it's closer to what I call the co-design. We're going to have 3 themes, and one is around governance and procedures. Another one is about training and monitoring. We're going to actually, can we, before we go into the breakout, define what those things are?
They're actually going to be defined at each of the
fantastic.
tables.
Yeah.
So for the people that are online, there's going to be a virtual process that you can actually type your comments in the chat. For the individuals here, we've given you colored stickers, and so we're going to group people by colored stickers, but I also want to feed you. So what I would like you to do is, in that process, the dots, red, green, and I think the blue dots are going to be coming together. But what we're going to do is set up the tables, and then if I could just ask people to grab a plate, and then to be able to come back to the table and just come back with your team. You don't even have to do the colors, we can just rotate. So what happens is we'll start with everyone at individual theme, and then we'll rotate. We're going to have to cut the time back because we've actually spent a lot of time on this part. So we're going to look at probably about a 30-minute process, which roughly is about 10 minutes roughly on each. But there are opportunities through the surveys so that people can still give feedback even after tonight, and you'll have that on your agenda. Okay?
Thank you. All right, so it's sorry, virtual people, there's no food for you, but people, enjoy.
I think we need somebody from the college here.
Sorry.
Okay, I think the audio, we are having some technical difficulties, so we're just working on fixing that, and I will repeat everything from the beginning. Okay, so I believe the audio is now working, and I will start from the beginning. Our apologies for that. So again, good evening, everyone. And please welcome to the 2022 Race and Identity Based Data Town Hall sessions. So here we will be sharing what we're doing to drive change and how we're moving forward. We are seeking input from you to provide feedback on the 38 action items put forward to address the outcomes of the 2020 Use of Force and Strip Search Report and continuously improve. So as we walk through these 3 themes, please feel free to put your questions and your feedback for each theme into the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat and transferring everything over onto the screens. We'll spend about 10 minutes roughly discussing each theme, and your questions and feedback will be addressed following this breakout session. If you do have additional feedback, please scan the QR code to the left here. So I will zoom into it a bit more and give you an opportunity. So this is where you'll be connected to the race-based data collection community survey. And at the same time, if you have further feedback or further questions that we don't get an opportunity to capture during this breakout session, please email us at equityinclusion@torontopolice.on.ca. So with that said, thank you again for sharing your perspectives and lived experiences, and we will get started with theme number 1. Okay. So I hope that everyone is able to see theme 1 on their screens. So theme 1 is about governance, procedures, and workflow, and this theme relates to police accountability, auditing, procedures, and processes. So what you'll see here on your screen are the action items that have been complete, and then the action items that are here for feedback that we're looking from you all this evening. So I will just focus on the 4 feedback action items, and I'll zoom in just a bit and read them out loud. So the first one is review of non-emergency calls to divert to alternative service providers. The second, develop a TPS equity strategy. The third, review committees for use of force and strip searches to include equity, diversity, and inclusion representatives. And lastly, improve identification of risk, noncompliance, and assessment of root causes through an audit supervisor at each division. So at this time, I will ask if you are able to, in the chat, just provide any questions that you may have regarding these 4 action items that you see on the screen, any feedback, but most importantly, if there is something that you believe is missing that should be incorporated in this theme and in the action items themselves, please do let us know and I will capture them on here. Okay, so one of the earlier feedbacks that I saw in the chat was about all interactions needing to be reviewed to properly gather data. So I will Use a blue sticky note to capture that feedback. Make that a bit bigger. There was also a question earlier in the chat about what the process was to register in person for our next town hall. So there is no registering process. These are walk-in town halls. So please feel free to show up at the next one. Okay, we'll spend about 5 more minutes on this theme. So please take this opportunity to give us your feedback and any questions that you may have on these 4 action items. Right, this is your opportunity to put in any questions that you may have for the panel as well. I did see something in the chat earlier regarding how can members of the public watching on YouTube ask questions to the panel. This would be one opportunity. If you don't get to do that today, you can always email us at the Equity Inclusion email address, and I will put that back up on the screen at the end. Okay, so I will read the action items for feedback again, in case anyone is having trouble seeing it on their screen. So the first one is review of non-emergency calls to divert to alternative service providers, develop a TPS equity strategy, review committees for use of force and strip searches to include equity, diversity, and inclusion representatives, and improve identification of risk, noncompliance, and assessment of root causes through an audit supervisor at each division. If anyone feels like there's something that is missing that should be included in this, please do let us know. Okay, about 1 more minute and I will move on to the next theme. Okay. So moving on to theme number 2. Okay, so theme number 2 is on training and education, and this theme relates to improving member training to include an equity focus. So once again, some of our action items have already been complete, and the focus here is on the action items that are currently in progress. So I will zoom in a bit and read them out loud for you all. The first one here being implement fair and impartial policing course, community and academic review of training curriculum, adverse childhood experience, ACE, training for all officers, enhance coach officer training course, active bystandership course, specialized training for crime analysts and 911 call takers, and revised probationary constable program to ensure community experience. Please take some time to give us your feedback on these action items, and particularly if you believe there's something missing that we should be including in them. I did notice a few questions earlier in the chat, so I will start to add those in here. And I'll use a different color for the questions. All right. So I will read the 2 questions that I've added so far from earlier in the chat. The first one here is there sensitive training for all officers in the police forces? Has there a passing mark standard been set? The next question is what percentage of 911 calls are mental health calls? I have a couple more here that I will add. The next one was on mental health. Are there training and standards set as a passing mark? Another question that we had from earlier in the chat is how often are psychological reevaluations performed with officers? And then I have a comment that I'll be adding as well. This was a comment shared earlier. Constables don't come from hard neighborhoods, generally speaking, hard to truly practice community engagement. Okay, I have a new comment in the chat here. Thank you very much. This one reads, behavior training matched to different racialized groups, i.e. appears as anger, but is really fear. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. All right, we have another question. Okay, does adverse childhood experience refer to the officer? Perfect. So I'll give about 1 more minute and then we'll move on to the final theme. Okay, so if there's nothing else on this for now, let's move on for the last 10 minutes of the session into the final theme. Okay, so theme 3 is on monitoring, and this theme relates to monitoring and transparent evaluation to make sure that we are accountable. So once again, 3 of our action items are complete. Work with other police services to improve use of force reporting, improve reporting for strip searches, and open analytics for use of force and strip search data. So our focus is on the 4 feedback action items, and we would love to get some feedback from you this evening. The first one here, and I will zoom in, is measure race and other points of police contact, collect member diversity and demographic data, develop a post-interaction survey with communities, analyze other outcomes for arrested persons, including diversions, booking, protective, and frisk searches, assess equity impacts for crime management plans, revise officer performance reports to include a community focus, including referrals and diversions, review existing corporate risk management report to include non-race information on use of force reports, and conduct multi-year analysis on use of force and strip searches to assess the actions and changes we are making. So again, let's take a few minutes to get some feedback. We'd love to hear your comments and especially what you think it's missing, should be added, or should be modified on these action items. Okay, adding a feedback note on here. So we have community feedback for probationary constables. Okay, we have another suggestion. Right, so we have here, collect officer diversity is not as important as setting and monitoring Black hiring targets. So that's referring to one of our second action item here for feedback. Thank you for that. All right, we have a question. Okay, there's a question regarding the second to last point. So the second to last point reads as review existing corporate risk management report to include non-race information on use of force reports. And the question is, why should these reports include non-race information? So once again, when this session is over, the panel will get an opportunity to sift through these comments and questions. Okay, we have another question. All right, the question is, what would be the analysis on use of force? Thank you. Okay, so just a couple more minutes, and I did notice that there was something in the chat about hiring Black trainers, so I will go back and add that as a feedback on theme number 2, training and education. Okay, we've got one more comment here. And that says, make access to contact reports, body cam, and other freedom of information requests free for Black people. Okay, so before our session ends, I just want to give an opportunity to revisit theme 1 and then go over some information from the main slide. Okay, so for theme 2, I just want to add hire Black trainers. Thank you. And then just give everyone an opportunity to revisit theme 1. So once again, theme 1 is on governance, procedures, workflow. And the action items we're seeking feedback on are review of non-emergency calls to divert to alternative service providers, develop a Toronto Police Service equity strategy, review committees for use of force and strip searches to include equity, diversity, inclusion representatives, and improve identification of risk, non-compliance, and assessment of root causes through an audit supervisor at each division. So here we have make requests for video and body camera, etc., free for those wanting to submit complaints regarding incidents occurring over the last 24 months. I do see a comment here regarding the training and education theme, so I will ensure to add that in. This is a question. Okay, and that is how often an officer is evaluated within a 3-year period. Example regarding racism training and cultural education. This is great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your feedback. Going back to theme 1 here on governance, procedures, and workflow. Okay, at every interaction, provide simplified info on how to request reports and footage on business card size documents. Okay, so we will be going back soon to the live town hall. Okay, so before we go back, I just want to quickly remind everyone again and provide everyone with an opportunity to scan our QR code for the race-based data collection community survey, as well as a reminder that if you do have any further feedback or input you'd like to send us, or any questions regarding any of the action items that we've had a chance to look over today, please email us at equityinclusion@torontopolice.on.ca. And again, I want to thank you all for sharing your perspectives and your lived experiences with us this evening.
Can we continue this conversation? I know I'm working on a project with Malton right now, with PO Regional Police. So I would love to sit back and have a conversation. Let me get this out of the way.
Our facilitator wants to help us with co-design work. I think trying to generate a better action plan from what we've got. So what we're doing is consultation, but it's not really co-design.
So I once upon a time heard a wonderful artist say, a hungry mob is an angry mob, and hopefully you all had some food in you and you're all good now. Thank you so much for participating, and thank you so much for going through the process. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do together. And so I'm really happy to be here and be a part of that process. We've had people virtually also participating. We've had some wonderful conversations around some major themes around how do we heal and work together and co-design our path forward. We have some questions that we want to from the virtual world here. I think you have the list of questions, Michelle. Did you want to just go through those questions? Oh, sorry. Sorry?
I can read through.
Okay, read some of those questions, and then you guys can answer them, and we'll wrap up.
So a question that's come up a few times here is around sensitivity training as well as adverse childhood experience training. Can we just elaborate a bit on what sensitivity training is existing for officers and what adverse childhood experience training is as well?
So adverse childhood events are events which create trauma in a young child's life, and that trauma tends to perpetuate. So there are things like divorce, parents with substance abuse issues, abuse, whether it be verbal, sexual, physical abuse. Those are all adverse childhood events, and they tend to accumulate and cause they're determinants of people's lives going out of control, and either having substance abuse issues, risks of suicide, and risks of criminality. So training our officers on adverse childhood events is both to help them identify and to prevent adverse childhood events and protect our children, but also to understand the paths and be sympathetic and empathetic to the paths that people have taken through life to arrive where they are. And I think the empathy training is similar, which is trying to help us understand where that person is coming from, which is so key to being a good copper.
Thank you. And another question here, and it's another theme, is around that all interactions should be collected for race. Can we talk a bit more about what some of the interactions will be and the next steps for this project in terms of data and how we're reviewing it?
Yeah, that's great. So this is, phase one. As you know, we started with the really high priority interactions that communities have flagged for us for many years, use of force and strip searches. But we're going beyond that, and some of the other areas that we're going to be looking at to understand, racial disparities in policing outcomes and experiences will be arrests, and the arrest pathway. So that includes things like decisions to release at scene, decisions to charge, decisions to book. And it will also we'll also look at youth diversions, right? Are we using those tools in a way that's fair and impartial and it impacts our youth in a positive way? We're also going to look at how we use mental health apprehensions, right? Particularly the discretionary powers that police have under the Mental Health Act. To apprehend somebody and take them to the hospital, right? There are certain situations where it's doctor ordered or it's court ordered, and police officers are called upon to execute on those orders. But there are also situations where officers have to make that decision in the moment that this person needs help in a hospital and to take them to the hospital rather than taking them through the criminal justice pathway. And so we'll be looking at the use of mental health apprehension powers and whether there's any racial disparities in that, and are we helping to serve our communities fairly and in that way. We'll also look at child apprehensions. That's an area that has been flagged for us as a priority for communities. We know from the Children's Aid Society's numbers that Black children and Indigenous children are overrepresented in care, and so we want to understand the policing contribution to those disparities and where we can help and work with families in a better way. So those are the things that are up ahead for us. And of course, as we engage and we continue this process of continuous engagement with communities, we'll hear other priority areas for us to consider as well.
I'll just add to that to say we're looking to make investments in making policing more digital, more electronic. If you look at some of the officers in the room, they'll probably be able to show you their paper notebook, which means that all the information they write down there is not accessible. We can't use it for analysis. So getting electronic notebooks, leveraging the body-worn cameras, improving our records management systems, all of those are going to improve our information management capabilities so that we can better tell the story of what's going on.
Thank you. And then sort of two other themes in the questions, one pertaining to training. One is a little bit back to the adverse childhood experience training here, and does that involve the officer looking at their own trauma? And then the second question on training is, can we expand a bit more on what the active bystandership training would include and how that's going to be incorporated?
Okay, so clearly we need someone from the college here to answer these questions. I will try my best, but I think you should take what I say with a grain of salt. There is an active bystander program within policing that we are kicking off, and this is about supporting officers and having officers support each other in holding each other to the standard of behavior that we'd all expect from them. Basically, the thinking is that the officers should be supporting each other in doing the right thing and heading off a PRS investigation, an OAI-PRD investigation, a SIU investigation by doing the behavior right and supporting each other. So if they see someone going off in the wrong direction, they pull them back. That's the active bystander training that we're undertaking. And the other one was?
The other one was related to the adverse childhood experience training.
Right.
Does
so
the
I believe the adverse childhood events training does involve self-examination, which is super important because those who hurt, and getting at what is making you what is challenging you is super important in terms of being empathetic to others.
Thank you. And the last theme of questions here are related to calls for service. So one question is, what % of 911 calls constitute a mental health call? And I know we don't have access to that data right now, but maybe we could talk to folks on where they may find that information. And the next question on calls for service is, what constitutes a non-emergency call for service?
All that information is on our website, but I cannot recall it with any accuracy off the top of my head. I seem to recall that about a third of our calls are either mental health or substance abuse related. So just to give you a sense of how large that problem is, and often substance abuse and mental health are dual diagnosis. They're linked to each other. So that's a significant issue.
And further information can also be found on the service's public safety data portal, which does have a mental health component with an area where folks can explore the data as well on their own and download some data as well in open analytics. And then the last question, perhaps for Inspector Cipro, is related to non-emergency calls for service. What may constitute a non-emergency calls for service for the folks asking at home?
Well, there's obvious emergencies, right? Imminent harm. What happens with our calls is depending on the nature of the situation, they'll be coded differently. They can have a different priority assigned to them. So a non-emergency call could be anything from a neighbor dispute to something that maybe started out a certain way but has now downgraded to where everyone is safe. You name it. We get so many different calls that are non-emergencies. Emergency calls, obviously fires, assaults, shootings, stabbings, all the sort of obvious ones like that. If there's a situation that's happening where nobody is going to be hurt, there's nothing of an emergent, dangerous nature happening, that could be a non-emergency call. Having said that, those calls can flip like this. So the dispatchers are very well trained in terms of eliciting that information and recoding calls to up the priority if need be. I don't know if that's specific enough, but things are very fluid, and our dispatchers are highly trained, and we just work with what we have and make changes as required.
My goodness, we went through a lot together today. We ate together, we played together. Those of you who are are on virtual, this was a wonderful room, great energy, intense, honest. Thank you all. I want to make sure that, Colin, I want you to take the floor and talk, have some reflection on your thoughts in the process.
So I think the media question I kept getting is, what are we here for? And the answer was to listen. I think we have been. I've got a lot to take back to the command, and I will do so. And we're going to continue to listen as we run 4 more of these sessions across the city. But that's not the end of it. Part of what I'm hearing is that we need to engage the community more and better, and that is in the works, and I'm open to conversation and suggestion as to how to do that. Also, that we have to acknowledge the history that is behind this, and to really feel that with y'all, and I think that's absolutely true. I'm also hearing that there's still a lot of work to do, and that we all acknowledge that. But I do appreciate that y'all came out, and that this is a conversation that we're having at all, that we are here, we're sharing, we're able to explain what we can explain in terms of what we've done, how we've done it, and what we're finding, and that everyone's taking that on board. And I want you to know that I'm listening and will continue to listen.
Thank you so much. And that concludes it. First of all, I just want to say that we should all give each other applause. I want to thank all of you guys for all of your service, all the community leaders, all of you for your service. This is a difficult task, and thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing your true experiences with us all. The next event and town hall is on November 16th at the JCA. I want to make sure that you come down and join us again for this healing process of collaboration and working together. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.